Imagine, my friend, imagine you were before Christ, at the time of Moses, and you did something wrong. Obviously, you don't know anything about Christ then. You don't know anything about Jesus. So if you turn to God, if you turn to God then, would he be forgiven?
No, because Jesus was...
No, before Christ,
before,
at the time of Moses.
Yeah. He was already there.
Let's say at the time of Moses, then would I be forgiven?
In the time of Moses, in the time of Joshua.
No, but would I have to still believe in him to get the
because
forgiveness?
Jesus was already there.
Where was it? Imagine.
So how was Jesus in the Old Testament? I mean, throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, you see different glimpses of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. John 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? And then verse 14, you go down, it says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. So it says that the Word became flesh. The words of God has always been there ever since the beginning, even since Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light. So the words of God has always been there, right? And it says that that word, the word that God spoke, became flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. So when Moses was obeying God, he was obeying the words of God. When Abraham was obeying God, he was obeying the words of God. When all the prophets in the Old Testament were obeying, they were obeying the word of God. John 1:14 says that the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. This word dwelling, it's so interesting, right? It actually means in the Greek tent or tabernacle, right? Just in the Old Testament, right, the high priest would go into the tent to go into the presence of God. And now this tent, right, is Jesus Christ. In the Old Testament, the tabernacle was a physical building, but in the New Covenant and the New Testament, the tabernacle, this tent, it's actually Jesus Christ. It says the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Used in the Old Testament was a tabernacle to go into the presence of God. In the New Testament, he used Jesus Christ and the flesh to also be the presence of God. In the Old Testament, you had to go through the temple, right, to go into the holies of holies. In the New Testament, you go through Jesus Christ to go into the Father. No one goes to the Father except through the Son.